All right, I can't see.
Should be good.
Okay. Okay.
There you are.
Right.
Yeah, we should be good. Go for it.
So, good afternoon, everyone. We got people still logging on in that, but I think we should be starting now. My name's John Colangelo. I'm a consultant with Jacobs and Rhode Island DOT, least important person in this meeting. My job is to facilitate, to do some presentations. So as people get settled down, I think we'll get going. First things, this is a public process that you're being involved in right now. What that means is we are going to record this Teams meeting. We're going to make it available on the RIDOT website. If you don't want to be part of that, please log off now, but this is going on the RIDOT website. I'm going to be giving the presentation. My assistant, Dan Herstein. If you people have questions, we'd like to hold off questions till the end, but if there's something important, please enter it into the chat room. Dan will interrupt me and we'll address whatever comes up at the time that it comes up if it's most relevant. There's going to be QA at the end. There's going to be some follow-up meetings. This is the kickoff meeting of this Nevi initiative. In 2 weeks, we're going to have a couple of follow-up meetings and we're going to have all kinds of ways of reaching out. So if you don't get a question answered today, we go into more depths as we move this whole outreach process forward. I'd like to introduce, to start with, the Nevi Dream Team. Most importantly, the introduction is JP Verducci, who sits at the end of the table. JP is one of the senior project managers with the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, 20 plus years managing complex technology projects. Liz Pettengill is also the head of Rydoc Communications. They have been supporting us throughout this whole process. On the consultant side, Jacobs Engineering is the consultant that's doing this project. Dan Herstein is the project manager. Catherine Burns, who's to my left, she is the primary author of this document that we're creating as part of this process. Amy Lahav is a Nevada expert with Jacobs on the energy side. And Amy is doing the exact same process in Nevada. I suggest to people, if you have questions at the end, one of the first questions should be, what's Nevada doing on this project? Because all the states are going through the same process. We're all learning from each other and the collaboration just helps everything along. Samantha Diaz is the Jacobs scribe who is recording everything going on in this meeting so that there'll be a written text of what happens, what questions or answers that will go on the website. And Somaye is a transportation planner with Jacobs who's also assisting on this project. Before we get to the first slide, I want to cover two things. First, the most important date for everybody involved with this project is August 1st. August 1st is when a report is going to go to FHWA about how we're conducting this Nevi process. That report has to go in, it has to be approved by FHWA before any of this funding is going to be used by RIDOT. So everything we're doing now is focused on August 1st. The second thing I want to do is introduce today's first acronym, and that's Nevi. I've said it about 6 times now. Nevi stands for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. And with that, I'm going to log off and we'll get to the PowerPoint. Next slide. All right, here's just a quick highlight about what we're going to talk about today. Second acronym of the day, IIJA, stands for the Infrastructure Investment Job Act. That's the legislation that created this whole thing. We're going to talk about what's in the act. We're going to talk about the Nevi program. We're going to talk about what we're going to produce as a result of this Nevi program in order to obtain the funding. Your participation, next steps are probably the most important part of these meetings. Dan? So, last year, Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act. It authorized $548 billion in new transportation funding, much needed road and bridges to, climate change protection and everything in between. This was signed into law November 15th, 2021, and it became the bipartisan infrastructure law. What we care about most is down in the second row, there is $15 billion set aside for electric vehicles. Of that 15 billion, half of it is for chargers. There's a goal of 500,000 charging stations by 2030. And everyone who is reading the slide focuses in on the second bullet. Rhode Island DOT, as part of this $15 billion, is going to get 3.8 per year, 23 million over the next 5 years in order to put these charging stations in place. That's what we're all working towards. That's what the August 1st report goes into authorizing this funding. Let's go to the next slide. So, some more on the $15 billion that is being spent. Again, we start with 500 plus billion, $15 billion for electric chargers. Half of that, 15 billion for electric vehicles, half of that's going into the charging, half of that is going into other initiatives regarding electric vehicles. $5 billion is going right to the states. And the feds, they got incredibly non-creative, which is what they should do. They said $1 billion per year times 5 years is how they divided up the $5 billion. 10% of that 5 billion, by the way, is going to the Secretary of Transportation for discretionary grants called gap filling. The feds have said that all of this is going into alternate fuel corridors. And JP or Dan, can you give everybody a Cook's definition of what is an alternative fuel corridor?
Yeah, I could do that. So this is something that's been going on for a few years, where FHWA has asked states to nominate fuel corridors to help sort of build out a national network. But up until now, there really hasn't been a lot of funding available. So it's taken on extra importance now because the Nevi funding is tied directly to building out at least your electric vehicle corridors. So they're just, it's part of the government's program to build a national network so that you can go wherever you want in your alternative fuel vehicle and be assured that there will be a place nearby to fill up or charge up.
Great. Yeah, you're going to hear about alternate fuel corridors throughout this presentation. We covered the $5 billion in funding. The other $2.5 billion in funding is discretionary funding. There's two $1.25 billion programs. The priorities of these programs are rural charging, climate change, resilient infrastructure, underserved, overbuilt communities. The two grant programs are the Corridor Charging Grant Program and the Community Charging Grant Programs. What we need to understand now is that there's guidance that's going to be coming out about how these things are going to be funded and administered. All right, let's go to the next slide. And in the overview, I talked about August 1st being the most important deadline of this group. We're going to talk about what's going to happen at that point. First off, the joint office The joint office was created by law, and it's the Department of Energy and Department of Transportation. Electric vehicles, they realized that the technology, the energy, as well as the transportation needs had to come together. So that's why they generated this joint office. We work under this joint office. They are going to be overseeing the $15 billion in funding as part of this Infrastructure Jobs Act. We, Rhode Island DOT, have to submit a plan by August 1st. It's called the State EV Infrastructure Plan. It's how we're going to manage these fundings. And I want to share two things from the federal guidance just on this report that we're developing and how we're going to share the funding. This is their direct guidance. And the first says that because Nevi formula program funds are directed to designated alternative fuel corridors to build out a convenient, reliable, affordable, and equity public charging network, states should first prioritize investments along the interstate highway system. States should review their designated alternative fuel corridors and consider designating additional corridors as part of the 6th round of requests for nominations. So as we move forward, we're really focusing on the highways. And you can see in the little table on the right, the criteria is public accessible, 1 mile max from the highway, 50 miles between stations. There's another thing I want to read from the federal guidance, and this is going to come up a little later on, but these programs will support the Justice 40 initiative, which establishes a goal of at least 40% of the benefits of federal investments in climate and clean energy infrastructure are distributed to disadvantaged communities. This does not mean, however, that 40% of all charging infrastructure funded under this program must be located in disadvantaged communities. There's guidance coming out that especially that spells this out. There are resources that the feds have provided for us to identify these communities and these needs. And as we move forward, there is going to be a webinar that's coming out in 2 weeks from the feds to give more guidance to this Justice 40 initiative. So we have the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. They are requiring all the states by August 1st to submit this plan about how they're going to be using this funds and building this infrastructure out. And then there's some requirements underneath it, what has to be in the plan. So that's kind of the overview. Dan, next slide while we're going to August 1st. I want to do a slide or two just on the kind of the technology things. And if you look at the upper graphics, electric vehicle charging, level 1 charging, that's pretty much, you plug it into your garage outlet at night the way you'd plug in a room air conditioner or a hair dryer, and overnight it'll kind of charge your car. Level 2 charging, 240 volts, that's your electric clothes dryer, that's your electric range, more powerful, more amps, quicker charging time. Level 3 chargers, that's 480 volts. That's the stuff you're seeing out on the highways. That's the stuff that really powers cars and charges them up much faster. Now let's go down to the lower graphic, the types of charging. Level 1, you plug it in overnight. Level 2, your clothes dryer, it charges in much less time. Level 3, it's basically 70, 40, or 14 minutes of charging time. And that's what we're looking at. That's what's being required for this project. They are saying level 3 chargers at 150 kilowatts, and they're saying 4 chargers per site. So you can charge 4 vehicles at the same time. Couple pieces of trivia. The level, if you're asking why not level 4 chargers, well, level 4 chargers are really, really powerful. These are the ones that have liquid cooling and the cables to your cars. And not all cars can accept level 4 charging. It's just too many electrons going through the hose. So the feds have established the baseline of 150 kilowatts, level 3 chargers. Another piece of trivia, if you're wondering why this is all how long to charge 100 miles, that's becoming kind of an industry standard. All these manufacturers have cars with different ranges. So you can't say 100% charge, 80% charge. These cars charge much faster when they're more depleted than reaching that last 10%. So the industry has kind of said, let's call it 100 miles of charge and how many minutes to get to it. So we got our level 3 chargers. We have 14 minutes per charge, and we have 4 chargers per location. Yeah. So now that we've done a little bit of the technology, August 1st is coming. We have to submit this Nevi plan. And quick question, are these slides going to be available or posted on the DOT website? Absolutely. The slides are going to be here. The FHW or the federal guidance is going to be here. All the resources you're going to need are going to be on the RIDOT website. We'll get to that at the end. So here are the plan elements. What we should stress is that our strategy is not to limit ourselves. You're not going to see the latitude and longitude of every charging station. This is a process. This is a strategy. This isn't, nuts and bolts. Here it is. Let's put them in next month. We're coordinating with other states. The director has been involved in this program. He's highlighted that we need to coordinate with the other states. We want similar interfaces, pricing structures. We need to have an operations maintenance strategy. And one of the things we're looking at is the enabling legislation that we may or may not need in Rhode Island to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And as I pointed out earlier, every state is doing the same thing. So, Amy, what is Nevada doing in this is a great question to ask. Then, by the way, I mentioned Justice 40 a couple of slides ago. The guidance on this is coming out from the feds. There is a webinar on the Justice 40 requirements. It's on June 29th. The joint office is going to be delivering it. When you go to the RIDOT website, we're going to have that information. We're posting it now so people can have access to the feds webinar. Last thing, again, this is kind of an FYI. We've talked to the industry, and what they have identified as a big need is going to be the workforce to maintain these 50,000 sites once they go out there. And they've identified, they need training, they need certification. This is something for the community college to get involved with because there's going to be a tremendous need to maintain all this infrastructure. Dan? So RIDOT is submitting I-95 as its first corridor. I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk a little about the I-95 submittal.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I-95 is the only, I should say, only electric vehicle alternative fuel corridor nominated right now in Rhode Island. We do have plans to expand that in later years of the program. And so we've evaluated I-95 as it stands right now, and how the electric charging stations match up with the Nevi requirements. And so as a reminder, they need to be within 1 mile off the AFC and no more than 50 miles between stations. Luckily, we're Rhode Island, and 50 miles pretty much covers corner to corner in Rhode Island. So along I-95, we've evaluated. So a few years ago, as part of I believe a grant pilot program, our friends at the Office of Energy and DEM and RIDOT partnered to install electric vehicle chargers at 2 of the parking rides. There are, right, so this lists that there's 2 of them. Those are only the fast chargers, and then there's a number of level 2 chargers at those sites as well. So they meet, they're certainly less than 1 mile off the corridor, but there's only 2 at each site, and the Nevi requirements require 4 at each site. There's a Tesla Supercharger station at a shopping center in East Greenwich. They've got 8 of them. They currently don't qualify because currently only Teslas can charge up there, and Nevi requires that all chargers or all vehicles should be able to charge there. That may change in the future. There's been some discussion that Tesla will open up their network to everyone. And there's also a car dealer in Pawtucket. I believe it's a Volvo dealer that has a couple of fast chargers available to the public. And Walmart in Providence does actually have what looks to be a fully compliant site with 4 chargers, very close to the highway. So that does a pretty good job of covering the entire I-95 corridor. The only sort of caveat to that is we've been talking to our friends in Connecticut, and so it's sort of that area between New London and Warwick. It's pretty rural, and we've discussed that we really want to upgrade at least one of those park and ride sites, so that's a fully functional station as well, and that'll create a nice continuous corridor from Connecticut's nearest site all the way up through Pawtucket and into Massachusetts.
Great, Dan. And again, I want to add one thing to it, which is this team is working very closely with ConDOT and MassDOT, and we're making sure that it's a seamless network for someone going through the whole thing.
Which is something that's encouraged by the joint office, is that states should work together and make sure, just because you're covering your state, you want to make sure those gaps at your borders are covered as well.
So let's go to the next slide. And I want to make just one main point on this slide. I started my engineering career like 30 plus years ago. And in those days, when the DOT wanted to build something, a bunch of engineers would go into a room, they'd take out their pencils, they'd get the old Mylar things, they'd design it, and boom, it would go out. Those days are gone. Now it's a more holistic approach. There's outreach. There's different stakeholders, there's collaborations. That's how we're working together. We're doing this as a team moving forward. Priorities today and priorities in this project are understanding the communities, collaborating with the stakeholders, understanding the near and long-term impacts of these types of projects as we roll them out. Dan. Now, RIDOT is administering this process. And what I'm going to do is turn this over to JP to talk a little bit about who the RIDOT core team is.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. JP Verducci from RIDOT here. I just wanted to stress to everybody and let you know where we are as a state with this process. We will be working at the highest levels of all the agencies involved, including the directors, as well as the Commissioner of Energy Resources, in order to work together as a team to establish all the parameters of the program collectively. We'll be encouraging as much feedback as we can in bringing in all the resources together from both the Department of Energy, environmental management, and anybody else through the planning process that we can coordinate with, we will. So it's something we wanted to stress to make sure, although we are receiving the funds and administering the program, we are working collaboratively with those other entities.
Great. And let's go to the next slide. So we have the core team. We're also formed a technical advisory committee. Most important thing is meetings through 2027. We're not just saying hello to everybody. We're going to make this great project, walking away from the table and doing our design. This is a process that we're going to be going through the next 6 years as things change, as needs change, and the industry develops. Would like to point out one of the team members, National Grid, Rhode Island Energy. The biggest eye opener for me coming into this is, it's when you look at the electrical requirements, it's not just adding another cable down from the pole to go to these charging units. A typical house uses about 900 kilowatts of power a month, which is 30 kilowatts a day. 4 chargers use 600 kilowatts, and they have vehicle after vehicle after vehicle. Catherine calls this the $1 million question, but one of the real challenges is how to quantify how much conditioning that National Grid Rhode Island Energy is going to have to do in order to support these new high current, high draw charging sites. Dan. So we're going to turn it over to everyone for comments, questions in a slide or two. But there was a question, is this on the website? We have until August 1st to get this report out to the feds. We have to get this in by August 1st so they can approve this by September 30th and we can go spend the funding. We have to get this together so we have a good framework that involves the proper people as we move forward and we build this thing out. What is going to happen is, this is part of the outreach process. The real core is this RIDOT Nevi project website. And I would go to the RIDOT webpage and go to projects and then search for it there. That's the easiest way to get it. But this is being populated right now. You can sign up and get email updates. As we develop stuff, we will make sure that you're included into the process. You'll get notifications. We're going to have in 2 weeks, 3 more stakeholder meetings. You can submit questions and there's a feedback form to make sure that your input gets into this. You're going to have a copy of this presentation, a recording of this meeting, so you'll be prepared and understand what transpired. There's going to be a schedule of the upcoming meetings to be posted, and that also includes the Justice 40 initiative. And there's going to be all the project documentations and links. So everything we have, you're going to have over on this project page. Dan, last slide. So, back. Oh, sorry. We just threw out a lot of information to you guys. Catherine has a really big document to put together in order to get funding approval. The document's at a high level. It's not the Latin lawns, but how we're going to go through this process in an equitable way over the next 5 years. Part of that process and part of what we're doing now is reaching out to people like you. We want your feedback. We want to know what questions you have, and the answers will be posted on the RIDOT website. So 2 C things: what existing pending plans do you have? And are there some other outreach events we should be involved in, keeping in mind the August 1st deadline? So with that, I want to turn it over to anybody in the group. Questions, comments, feedback?
Yeah, so people can submit questions in the chat. I see some are coming in already. Like we said, if you're shy or you haven't thought about your question, please feel free to go to the website and submit your question there, and we'll try to respond to everything. The chat up here so you can see it.
See, I think there's one about kind of the corridors for approval or nomination. That might be a good discussion point for the alternative fuel corridors that have been nominated through the first 6 rounds. For Rhode Island, that just includes the 95 corridor. And the funding now is tied directly to that AFC corridor and that designation. So for the time being in this round, we've kept it to 95 due to the limitations of applying the funding so that we can have more flexibility in our approach in the long term. So we've definitely looked at these other corridors, like you said, like Route 44, Route 6, especially Interstate 295, and their impact on the network too.
Yeah, and this is something we talked to other states about. On the one side, Connecticut said, we've already got several corridors that we need to build out, so they elected not to nominate any additional ones this round. On the other side, we talked to someone from Massachusetts who said they did, and now they maybe have a little buyer's remorse, and maybe we over-nominated. But absolutely, we are definitely considering additional card. We actually went through the exercise to determine, what our sort of ranking preference would be on additional corridors, but we just wanted to keep the flexibility for now of just having to build out I-95 and work through that process.
I think the next question too on owning and operating, we've heard different models from different states, still to be determined of whether they want to go with third-party ownership. For example, Massachusetts, they're very pro kind of PPP, looking to go that direction. Connecticut, we didn't hear that yet. I think it's still to be determined, especially based on the federal guidance that we expect to be coming out with more information on that operations, maintenance, in that model.
And another thing I think it's important to realize at this stage in the process, the plan isn't going to be so much exactly what we're doing. It's more about how we're going to get to what we're going to do. So you may hear us say oftentimes to be determined or we're awaiting guidance. And I think those two items kind of go together. The more we find out, the better informed we'll be. And again, an iterative process that will continue on for the next 5 years. So as these things come up, we'll have a chance to analyze both business model, governance structure, and, you know, all the oversight, maintenance and things like that. Again, that's one of the strong points that we're going to cooperate with our energy resources team, who can obviously help with policy, and our environmental management teams who, you know, could really help us out on air quality impacts and justice requirements.
Question about solar power.
Question on solar power. Did I understand correctly that stations up?
Sorry.
When I read Nevi, I thought I read that solar power would or could be used to power the charging stations up. That is true. That is in the Nevi guidance. It's possible. It's not required, but possible. Did I understand correctly that stations greater than 150 kilowatts will not be supported by Nevi? Is that from the federal guidance?
I would say that's a minimum. It's minimum 150 kilowatt, which is their attempt to future-proof it. You can certainly find lots of stations out there right now that don't meet the 150 kilowatt standard. But certainly there are some that even exceed that. I guess there could be additional guidance in subsequent years if they try to increase it.
And Mel, when we sat down and talked about this, what we said is at the initial stakeholder meeting, you know, provide the 10,000 foot level. We have a chance to talk about this. That is a great question for one of the follow-up meetings. We'll make sure that we get you an exact answer in the next round of stakeholder meetings. And you can count on that on the RIDOT website. If there's a question and answer part or where there is one, we'll make sure we give you a very detailed, exact answer.
Yeah, we are planning to post based on the feedback today and other research we've done, some frequently asked questions on the website. So questions like that we'll try to cover on there.
Yeah, also important to note that the federal guidance, we have to remember with there's so many things we want to tackle with this initiative that we have to remember the federal program, at least as far as the AFCs are going, are really designed towards corridor enhancement. So that's why that level of charger was spec'd for that. It's going to give you a relatively quick charge. It's going to be near the corridor, and it really is to establish that national system. Once more flexibility and more guidance comes along in the program, we may decide that those specs can be changed a little bit, but the first step is to build according to that spec on 95.
Can you repeat the locations that are being proposed for the I-95 corridor? Dan, you want to call that slide up real quick? And again, to Mike Walter, you'll have a copy of the presentation on the website, and you'll also have a copy of this meeting. There we go.
Yeah, so these are all existing infrastructure that we feel meets the requirements or comes close to meeting the requirements. So, you know, and probably the most obvious answer would be one of the park and rides we're looking to upgrade, since we already have 2 at those locations. So increasing it to 4, you know, there should already be some infrastructure built there rather than developing a completely new site. We're still evaluating you know, the Walmart site to make sure that that's fully compliant. So no additional infrastructure may be needed there if that one's already required. I saw someone put in the chat that they may not have the correct type of charging adapters there. So that's something to consider too. And then there's the Tesla site that's, again, that's private, that's out of our control, which would help us, meet the requirements for build out if Tesla were to open up their network, but we're not relying, the joint office doesn't recommend relying on that. So currently, we're probably considering one of the park and ride sites to upgrade, but a lot of, more evaluation needs to be done at those sites, discussions with the power company.
From Michael, knew this was coming. What do the federal requirements state with respect to workforce development and expanding access to family sustaining jobs and the growth of EV infrastructure? Very important question. It's a very specific question. Michael, we will have an answer for you, just citing it, copying it, putting it in, making sure that it's exact, not our interpretation of it. We'll have that on the website. And if you go on the website and get into the feedback form that you want notifications, we'll make sure that you get a notification when we put this information on the website. That's actually one of the topics that we want to talk about at some of the follow-up stakeholder meeting. All right, from Paul, we took care of this one? No. Nevi supports sites next to interstates. In Rhode Island, there's distributed sites that need some sort of economic stimulus. Have these sites listed through RIDEM OER been looked at as potential charging stations?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things we did when we originally partnered up with DEM and OER is to put all that together. So very first thing was to list all those out, get their locations, get the inventory of where they stand, and then begin to look at them, so in total, but also through Nevi. So we are not losing sight of those. And actually right where you're asking is reflected in the slide that Dan had. Because that actually, those park and ride sites were part of a original pilot program, including DEM and OER. So we're certainly looking to not only make an impact through the Nevi program, but also positively influence statewide.
Great. JP, you got another question. Can you clarify your comment? Are you looking for input on the type of project stakeholders would like to see, or just the process for gathering information going forward?
If I understand that correctly, I actually am looking for a little bit of both. The first thing that we want is, as far as the type of project, that's going to be, something we need to decide, and along with some informed information from our consultants, is to look at the various options out there. So type of projects may include, slower chargers, or perhaps it's 2 instead of 4. That's kind of what I was getting at with that. Once we build to spec on this first round, we'll be able to, again, continue the engagement with the stakeholders, and perhaps we decide something should be located near the shoreline or, in a more rural area. So the types of projects really can be up to the stakeholders and us together to determine where we get the most bang for our buck, the most usage, and, encourage the program to grow.
Great. And again, I'm looking, this is a 7-year project. This is not Latin lawn today and we just go build from there on in. This is a project that's the Rhode Island DOT, the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. So it's a wide net that we're casting for types of projects as well as information. We want to make this work. Have the feds provided guidance on the minimum amp for fast charging stations in this initiative? I'm a former engineer. I was earlier in my career. I've forgotten most of it. But if you go to the slide where we were talking about volts and that, we talk about watts, amps times volts equals watts. So it's all there in the formula. And I'll take a look at this quick question and I'll throw some stuff on the website, how it's calculated. That's great, thanks. Paul, actually, 100%. And any other questions as we go along? And Dan, if you can just scroll to the top, make sure we caught every question. All right. Oh, wait, does RIDOT envision owning and operating each of these stations or a subset? Or will you be working to set up the host agreements for third-party ownership?
Great question, Ryan. We certainly are looking at all the options again, and I said that on the onset, just so we don't sound like we're not answering, but it truly is something to be determined. What we want to get from outreach, just like we're doing today, is perhaps some ideas on some things we're not actually aware of at the moment that might work better. So we don't want to just come out and say what we're going to do. As previously stated, we've talked to some other states. It's kind of all over the map. In Rhode Island, we have multiple opportunities here to do one, the other, or a mixture of both. So we will keep you informed.
Yeah. And as a data point on that, it also includes legislation and what we're allowed to do. The private sector can do anything they want that's legal. The public sector can only do what is allowed in legislation. Oh, will the state be looking to partner with one charging station provider for all stations, or will there be multiple brands, manufacturers involved? JP,
Yeah.
I think you covered it.
Yeah, very similar, Ryan. We'll definitely open to suggestions on that. Again, we will look into some best practices. We are aware of a few different organizations that could provide these things, but again, it's going to be a more long-term, as we're going to have to go through all the, as John was alluding to, the procurement stages and making sure it's fair and equitable for all. A piece of that also applies to the Justice 40 component too, as far as the distribution of the work.
And I think from Paul, on the DEM side, is environment remediation enhancement being considered at each site?
Yeah, as far as we're concerned, once this gets up and running, it'll be at least the construction building part will be a typical DOT project, which will require all of our environmental certificates, straight through like we would on any other project where we're taking up and getting into the ground. So absolutely.
Question on amps and watts, and yeah, I'll take care of that offside. Dan, do we have the ability to unmute people?
You could.
Guys, well, I don't want to keep people longer than they need to be. Everybody knows about the RIDOT website. Anyone have anything they want to say verbally? Awesome. If you check the RIDOT website, we're going to have announcements of all the upcoming meetings, everything we promised. We also had an email list that everybody who's attending this meeting got. We will be sending invites through that email list. And again, on the website, if there's something specific you have, or you want to make sure that if you're not on our original email list, somebody forwarded to you, get on the website. We'll make sure we give you all the notices that everybody else on the list has. Thank you very much. And we'll see everybody the week of the 20th for 3 more follow-up meetings, a little more detail, and hopefully a little more feedback. Thank you all very much.